Good evening, good evening. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Nationwide at 5. I'm Ricardo Brooks.
And my name is Sanjay Lewis, and it's now time for the nation's business. Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness says the recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling dismissing Mexico's lawsuit against American gun manufacturers will not close the door to progress on the fight against arms trafficking in the region. In 2023, Jamaica had joined Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, the Bahamas, and Trinidad and Tobago to support Mexico's civil suit.
However, earlier this month, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously dismissed the $10 billion action. Dana Davey reports.
Mexico's legal challenge, unprecedented in its scope, sought to hold American gun manufacturers accountable for the steady and deliberate flow of deadly weapons across its border. In the case known as Smith & Wesson Brands, Inc. versus Estados Unidos Mexicanos, Mexico had argued that gun manufacturers are knowingly aiding and abetting the unlawful sale of their firearms to straw purchasers who are trafficking them across the southern border to give to drug cartels. But the justices said that because Mexico's complaint does not plausibly allege that the gun makers criminally aided and abetted retail dealers' unlawful sale of weapons to Mexican traffickers, it is barred by the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or PLCAA. In a statement on Monday, Prime Minister Holness cited the federal protections that shield the gun industry from liability. Dr. Holness says the outcome is not surprising. He says while it closes one avenue through which Mexico and other Latin American and Caribbean nations, Jamaica included, sought to influence the U.S. to do more to stem the flow of illicit arms throughout the region, other avenues exist. Prime Minister Holness says lasting solutions will come through bilateral collaboration, not litigation. Dr. Holness, whose doctoral thesis focused on the ways U.S. gun laws and regulations impact the illicit gun trade in Jamaica, says the same criminal networks in the Caribbean that engage in the trafficking of humans, narcotics, and other contraband that more directly impact Americans are the very ones responsible for the illicit importation of firearms from the U.S. This, he says, represents a common threat to both Caribbean countries and their northern partners. Regarding U.S. legislation, Dr. Holness says there is room for improvement. He cited steps taken to enhance federal enforcement against gun trafficking in recent years. For example, the bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed in 2022 introduced tougher penalties for straw purchases and created new trafficking offenses. More recently, the U.S. has proposed the Caribbean Arms Trafficking Causes Harm (CATCH) Act. Though not yet passed, Dr. Holness says it signals growing willingness within the U.S. Congress to curb the unintended consequences that American gun laws have on neighboring states. The CATCH Act would mandate the U.S. Department of Justice to track and report on gun trafficking to the Caribbean while strengthening enforcement cooperation within the region. He says there's also scope to expand joint operations between U.S. agencies and Jamaican law enforcement to better map trafficking networks and dismantle them from the inside out. In addition, Dr. Holness says there's value in more robust data sharing on suspicious bulk purchases, serial numbers, and interstate transfers. Dana Davey for Nationwide News.
Thanks, Dana.
Prime Minister.
Go ahead, Sanjay.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Holness says the majority of guns trafficked into the island are shipped from the United States. In 2023, this amounted to around 85% of the weapons seized. Dr. Holness says the guns include high-powered rifles, military-grade pistols, and extended magazine clips with ammunition, the preferred tools of contract killers, gang lords, and criminal networks.
Joining us now to discuss, we have criminologist Dr. Jason Mackay and attorney at law. We're going to be joined by attorney at law at the Golding Law Group, Wayne Golding. Dr. Mackay, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, obviously a setback. I mean, it was a long shot bid to begin with, but obviously a setback. What more can we do? Because it almost seems like we're sitting ducks in this region, yeah?
Well, I mean, it's a bit disappointing. I didn't particularly like Jamaica joining it because I knew it would lead to an embargo of some sort, and that is what has happened. They stopped selling us arms now. From day one, I knew it would come with some problems, but I was kind of hoping at least they would take some responsibility for the fact that the weapons are leaving their ports and coming into other ports, just like how when narcotics leave our ports and end up in their ports, that we are held responsible. But that being said, I mean, I think the message has been sent that something needs to be done, and I think the U.S. government is going to move a lot tighter, I think, on the manufacturers of weapons to ensure that there's more control mechanisms that relates to export and mass purchases by people, because I think that is where the problem is coming by. You know, I think because now they've been sued, even if they've won the suit, I think everybody's going to sit up and pay a little bit more attention rather than if we had just sat dormant. So there was an advantage for us to joining the suit. It just resulted in an embargo, you know.
The Prime Minister has said, Jason Mackay, that the ruling doesn't end the fight. And realistically, what tools do Caribbean nations now have, if any, to push back against the illegal gun trade originating in the U.S.?
Well, remember, the illegal gun trade isn't a manifestation of the U.S. government. You know, it's criminals, largely Jamaican, in the United States who are shipping the guns to their cronies out here. So, I mean, it is not like it's not our government against their government. It's us against our criminals who live overseas. So we can't have them make it look like the only thing that is all is lost because of that. We are doing a lot to detect guns, and we're finding guns, and we're recovering lots of guns. So, and there's been many improvements to the borders, and a lot of technology is being utilized down there now. So the fight will continue. I think the fact that they've been brought before the court may help on that side over there, that they become a little bit more responsible. And so I don't think it was a futile attempt, and I think we're going to continue recovering guns, but we need to bring in sanctions that are more in keeping with a crisis. We have capital punishment in our books. If you import drugs into Singapore, if you import drugs into Taiwan, if you import drugs into China, Vietnam, and other democratic countries that are in Asia, you get the death penalty for it. And I think if mass importation, like guns by the hundreds, needs to be treated the same way. Unless you do something like that, you're not going to stop it.
But Dr. Mackay, in our legal situation now, where the courts don't seem open to that argument that there is some serious emergency that requires extraordinary measures, you think something like that would pass judicial muster, death penalty?
Well, must remember, the court was virtually letting out people with a slap on the wrist for firearms, and they went from that to 20 to 15 years for a pistol because of legislation. It's legislation that determines what the court does. I mean, it has nothing. It's not that the judges didn't want to give capital punishment. If you're going to use capital punishment in a murder case, there are certain steps you have to take by the prosecution, and then the prosecution faces the challenge that if they do that, the jury is likely to push back, because there are a lot of people who don't want to be involved in the murder of in the execution of somebody else at any level. So an easier route was always to go for life imprisonment, but it's very much possible to utilize it for something, especially if it's a judge-alone trial.
Yeah, but the thing is, before we bring in Dr. Golding, the vast majority of illegal firearms in Jamaica, we can attest and agree, originate in the United States. Yeah, the traffickers exploit the legal loopholes in the U.S. states like Florida and Texas and smuggle weapons via freight barrel couriers. We see that happening. So even with the harshest laws that we may implement in Jamaica, we're not addressing the root cause of the problem, wouldn't you say?
We have an extradition agreement with the United States, Many of those persons over there who are trafficking the guns here are not U.S. citizens. So we know we're going to run into a wall if we try and extradite a U.S. citizen. But although legally we shouldn't, but that's just how it works out practically. But if a Jamaican green card holder or illegal alien is over there exporting guns, and we have a warrant that we can send for them and bring them back home, and capital punishment is the sanction. Once something dramatic like that happens, it's going to have an effect. It's just that if you're going to treat it the same way, you're going to go from the 5 guns per barrel to the 200 and 300 guns per heater with a regularity that you don't want to see. And at some point, they're going to have more arms than the armed forces. So you have to do something drastic, and drastic works. I mean, since the new gun bill can only be described as drastic, they can't with a toy water gun, you can end up going to prison for it, and it's mandatory. We've done drastic; it works. But in this case, the only thing that's going to somehow discourage persons from getting involved in the mass exportation of guns and importation of guns into Jamaica is a sanction that is greater than decades in prison.
Mm-hmm. Wayne Golding, do you believe this ruling has effectively closed a legal pathway for countries like Jamaica to hold U.S. gun manufacturers accountable?
Well, I think in the first place, the lawsuit was ill thought of, because the exception is clearly there for the gun manufacturers to be immune from this type of lawsuit. This is something that has been tried by not only individuals, but corporations, communities, countries. And so the end result of the lawsuit is not surprising to me. However, I don't think the challenges are going to be met by a legal framework that cannot be implemented. Because what it is, people have to realize that the gun manufacturers are so powerful in the United States. And with the free market system that's there, I think it's going to be difficult for one to use any legal means to try and stem the flow of guns into other countries, specifically Jamaica. And ultimately, the responsibility rests on Jamaica and Jamaican authorities, whether through diplomatic means or through their own implementation of some sort of better security system to our porous borders, because apparently, you can conclude that the guns are coming in and they have to come in at a point of entry. And so you have to recognize that there's a weakness there. So no matter how you legislate, as long as people have a financial gain, significant financial gain, and sometimes a political gain, stemming the flow from this country, the United States, I don't think it will stop. The responsibility ultimately stops at the feet of the authorities in Jamaica to make Jamaica less porous borders. And I mean, that's a fact of life. I mean, you can legislate until the cows come home, but it is ultimately the responsibility of those who are in charge of our borders in Jamaica to put systems in place to try and stop what's happening with the illegal importation of guns.
Dr. Mackay, the argument that we could try to, for example, have more bilateral conversations with the U.S., countries in Latin America, how successful do you think those efforts would be?
I mean, every little bit helps, but in respect of what Dr. Golding was just saying, you must remember now, in the United States, with all of their resources, have never been able to create a shortage of cocaine into their country, which is not homegrown. So it's not really about our borders being porous. We are an island. We have a massive fishing industry of small men who go out and fish. There's so many ways you can get guns into Jamaica. Plus, there is also, Jamaica has received more personal effects from the United States. People send down barrels. So our volume, you cannot literally say that you're going to search every single barrel coming to Jamaica. It's not logistically possible. So based on how our borders are, they're in keeping what borders are normally. The reason why you catch so much guns coming in is because the customs and the police are working and doing what they can to catch them. But by nature of our island and by nature of our import-export culture, you're going to find that they're going to be able to pass. Which is why I say it has to be the one crime that a man don't want to touch, because if he touches it, it's dealt in a totally and completely different way. And we've already done that with guns now, which is why so many of them are firing on the police rather than getting caught, because they know once they're caught, they're probably gone for 25 years. You're going to have to do something even greater than that, because when somebody exports guns to Jamaica in mass, they know that they can make a lot of money out of it, probably in keeping with what you'd earn off of narcotics. Now, when you can actually extend the legal hand into the United States and extradite them back to Jamaica to face capital punishment, well, that now becomes something that somebody will stay away from.
Yeah. When Golden, the U.S. has spent decades funding anti-drugs program in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we see that, for example, in Colombia and other areas. But it has not equally prioritized stopping the outbound flow of guns. Why is it that the U.S. is not paying greater attention to the calls made by several leaders in the Caribbean, the cry for help, to put stricter legislation in place to ensure that they stop the outflow of guns from the U.S. to the Caribbean?
Well, we have to be realistic about the situation. It comes down to economics, and who controls this section of concern. And impacting gun industry by legislation has never been a popular thing here in the United States, even if it affects one gun being sold or leaving the country. So we have to face that reality. There have been pot shots taken over the years with different types of soft legislation for monitoring and all of that stuff. But the bottom line is there's not that appetite for it. And we have to stop trying to convince ourselves that the same concern of the outgoing flow of guns from the United States is the same concern as the inflow of drugs and other contraband into the United States. And there's a vested financial interest in it. Also, you're talking about extradition from the United States. There are currently extradition laws between Jamaica and the United States, which do allow for extraditions to happen. However, the legal framework here in the United States would make that very difficult. It's not like deporting somebody, or expelling somebody from the country. It's a quite different legal area of practice. And the difficulty that comes with that is massive, and it has been an obstacle for years. But again, I point to the fact that we cannot throw our hands up in the air and say, well, it is impossible for us to look at every barrel coming into Jamaica or every shipment coming into Jamaica, because you're talking about the lifeline of a country. Mm-hmm. And I would think with technology that's available, and I see the new police commissioner moving in that way. He's a very technologically oriented person. There are systems that can and should be put in place to try and stem the flow. Maybe there are that we don't know as a general public, but I know that we cannot say it is impossible. We can't do it. It is obvious that there's a breakdown in the system somewhere where the guns are actually coming into the country.
Yeah, I hear that ever so often, Wayne Golden, individuals calling for greater technology to be utilized. And you hear from the wharfs, for example, the shipment ports, that they have implemented several security measures to stem the flow. But as you indicated, it is very hard with so many containers coming in.
Well, I won't profess to be an expert, but when you do have a problem like this, I would think that there will be some comprehensive study done in order to figure out what kind of measures you could effect to increase the detection efforts that you do have. And obviously, when you hear about a shipment of 200 and something guns and how many thousands of ammunition being found out, it makes you wonder how much has gone, how much has not been caught. And then you don't hear the follow-up as far as who is responsible for the importation and the receiving of these guns. It dies a quiet death. Oftentimes, you don't get that follow-up to say XYZ person, because it takes more than one. You know, it has to be an organized effort. So I think we have to think of how we can solve the problem ourselves at our borders, because the guns are going to keep coming. The legislation is not going to stop it. The financial benefits are of such that the people who are engaged in the trade, no legislation, not even death. Because, I mean, death penalty, yes, it's a form of punishment, but it has not been a deterrent. And we have seen that all over the world. So that's rather, I wouldn't say a simplified approach, but these people are not scared. They are not scared. They take the chance and they'll do what they have to. So we have to be realistic to say how we can outsmart them, so to speak. What can we put in place? And even then, when we do find those people who are involved, they should be publicized who they are. Every gun that comes into Jamaica from the United States with a serial number is traceable. I just leave that with you, to think about. And so is it that the United States authorities are saying, well, it's a free market here. People can buy any amount of guns. They can ship them to anywhere they want to ship, legally or illegally. And the power of the National Rifle Association cannot be put to the side or ignored, because it's a market-driven problem that we're having, because it's profitable to export guns from the United States.
Have to leave it there. Wayne Golding, Dr. Jason Mackay, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.